lived the most insane prison sentences in history. Harvey Stewart. Harvey Stewart outlived both his 62-year sentence and all of his family members on the outside. He tasted freedom again after being paroled at the ripe old age of 83. Stewart became the longest-serving inmate in Texas. Otis Johnson. Otis Johnson became free after 44 years behind bars for attempted murder of a police officer. He was 25 when he was jailed and 69 when he re-entered society as a homeless man. Upon release, he was given $40 and 2 bus tickets. Patrick Maloney. Maloney was only 15 when he murdered his mother and stepfather, for which he spent 50 years in jail. But what's shocking about his story was that he had been having sex with his mother since he was 13 and was caught doing so by his stepfather, who may have shot his mother himself. Eddie Collins. Eddie Collins spent 44 years in jail. In 1973, he and his brother Johnny got caught up in a drug deal. A fight broke out and Johnny shot someone. Johnny took a plea deal and got a 10-year sentence, but Eddie went to trial and was given life. Iwao Hakamada. After being in prison for 46 years, Hakamada made the Guinness World Records as the world's longest-held death row inmate. He was a professional boxer who was sentenced to death for the Hakamada incident mass murder. He was released in 2014 after the court discovered that evidence against him may have been falsified. John Franzese. John Franzese was institutionalized for half a century. He was a fearsome killer and big mobster earner who boasted of murdering at least 60 people in his lifetime of crime as the underboss of the New York Colombo family. He was released at 100 years old and died 3 years later in a hospital. Makal Lalung. Lalung served 54 years in an Indian jail for allegedly violating Section 326 of the Indian Penal Code for causing grievous harm. Although there was no substantial evidence against him, he was soon transferred to a psychiatric institution, then to another jail where his case was forgotten. The poor guy wasn't even sentenced to anything. Howard Christensen. Howard Christensen killed a teacher at age 16 and would spend 64 years behind bars for his crime. He initially received life imprisonment without parole, but 30 years into his sentence, it was changed to 200 years in prison. He was released at 64, but died 2 years later. Richard Honeck. Sent to jail at 22 years old for the murder of a friend, Richard Honeck was an American murderer who served 64 years, one of the longest custodial sentences ever to terminate in a prisoner's release in American criminal history. He was released at 87 years old and lived for another 5 years. Charles Ford. Charles Edrit Ford also outlived his 64-year prison sentence, but the sad part was he was innocent. After being convicted of murder in the early 50s, where black people didn't have rights, he served one of the longest sentences as an innocent person. He was finally released at 86 years old. Johnson Grigsby. Johnson Van Dyke Grigsby spent 66 years in prison. An African American, he landed in jail for second-degree murder in 1908, although he actually killed the victim in self-defense. After being rejected for parole 33 times, he was finally released in 1974, but he found it difficult to adjust to life outside prison. Joseph Ligon. Imprisoned at 15 years old and sentenced to life without parole for murder, Joe Ligon served a total of 68 years. He could have been released sooner, but he rejected a resentencing and parole offer in 2016, which happened again in 2017. He was finally released in 2021 at 83 years old. Paul Geidel Jr. Paul Geidel Jr. served the longest prison sentence in the United States. He spent 68 years behind bars and lived to see the day he became a free man once again. Paul was convicted of second-degree murder at 17 years old and was paroled at age 86. Betty Smithy. As America's longest-serving female inmate, Betty Smithy served 49 years in jail for strangling a 15-month-old baby that she was babysitting. She was initially sentenced to life without parole, but was eventually resentenced to 48 years. In 2012, Smithy was paroled at 69 years old.